Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm a Vedic astrologer of some 34 years experience, and I'm here to talk with you about Vedic astrology, uh, how that interacts with the world around us, how it will interact with your chart, and also what it means for the next few weeks. So I do uh, this every week. I post this every week. Uh, Please um, make suggestions for what I can do for you in terms of this broadcast. I'm open to suggestions and opinions. I do plan to be broadcasting more regularly than once a week, but that will come a little bit down the road. And if you want to contact me for lessons or reading, please uh, text me at or call me at 508-525-0001 or uh, email me at G at gmail.com. Again, that's Gary Gomes G at gmail.com. Okay, and the number again is 508-525-0001. Okay? All right. So you can text me. We can discuss what you want done, how much I do charge, how much that would cost, and obviously there's no obligation if you call me just to inquire about price or options. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And again, I can also refer you to other sources of Vedic astrology instructors. Uh, I have contacts pretty much all around the world, and so let's say if you want to do something in a language other than English, I can refer you to people who can do that for you. So it's no lose if you want to contact me. Okay. So please, if you would be so kind, subscribe, like if you feel so impelled, and also comment. You're more than welcome to comment or discuss or even um, give me your opinion on where I got things right or where I got things wrong. So I'm going to look at two charts today. One chart will continue the examination next week, which is the Makar Sankranthi chart. That's a holiday on January 14th, 9:03 a.m. is normally the time that the observance starts. And essentially it marks the end of winter in India and the start of the harvest season. So um, again, there is some dispute among people on the part of people I respect as to whether or not this is really the start of the harvest season. But again, we're just looking at it from what I would call um, the, the generally accepted standpoint. Okay, so uh, and I know there are a variety of astrologers who disagree, or at least one astrologer I know that disagrees with this standpoint because of um, it doesn't seem to fit the actual harvest times, which I think is a valid point. But um, but again, like I said, uh, we're going at it from a traditional standpoint. So without getting too much into the weeds about what this particular combination means, let's look at the planetary combinations right now, and then we'll jump ahead to Makar Sankranti, and then we'll jump back to your horoscopes for the week, and then we'll look at the globe and see where action is starting at the globe. Okay, so let's share the screen. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry about that. I'm not sure whether this is doing that. Give me a second. All right, I'm trying to get. All right, that's what I want to do, but it's still not showing. So we'll try it one more time. All right, so now the screen is sharing, and this is the Makar Sankranthi chart. So we're going to go to that in a second. We'll look at the current chart. So we're going to swap the charts, and this is the current chart. We have essentially this is kind of an interesting combination because we have the moon tightly conjunct Rahu. Okay, so like really within a matter of like 1 degree. So Rahu's the north lunar node. That's pretty much what's responsible for a lot of what I would call the press obfuscation um, uh, right going on right now. So again, everyone's aware of the the objects or the drones that are seen in the sky, and there are a lot of other news stories which are extraordinarily confusing right now. Um, and so a lot of that has to do with the moon Rahu. And this can cause a little bit of a panic, um, which I think is reasonable given the fact that we've had two terror attacks back to back around uh, on on New Year's Eve, right? So that was actually caused. If you go back a little bit, so this is January 5th. Here we go back to, let's say, um, let's go to January 1st. So uh, what precipitated the terror attacks was really the Mars aspect on the moon. Okay. Um, the other thing that made it a little bit worse was Mars is also aspecting Saturn and Venus at the same time. So that was true over the past few days. We had Mars uh, aspect on Saturn and Venus. This is going to make people very short-tempered, uh, very stunned, and right now, I mean, actually, it's rare that I say a Moon Rahu conjunction is a little bit of a good thing, but at least today it is because yesterday, in particular, people were incredibly short-tempered because Moon was with Rahu. I'm sorry, Moon was with Saturn and Venus, and all three, and they were all aspected by Mars. So Mars throws these weird aspects. Mars, so Mars aspects seven, I'm sorry, 4, 7, and 10 signs away. It aspects it's aspecting the sign of relationships, which is Libra. It's aspecting the sign of friends, which is Saturn and Venus. And right now, the moon is with Rahu, which focuses on scandals or belief systems or trust in government. And there was an interesting um, article I came across on Substack, which is essentially, um, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Um, Essentially, it really accused uh, government of essentially gaslighting people. That is not letting people know what's going on or explain what's going on. And I think that's actually pretty fair because we have, um, I would say, a lot of secrecy. We haven't received an explanation for um, the bombings, we haven't received like really solid explanations for or the terrorist attacks. We haven't received really solid explanations for the drone sightings and things like that. So I think that's actually a fair analysis. So that does tend to cause a little bit of confusion. We're also going into the next administration with a really massive deficit. Now, normally I'm not really concerned about that, to be honest with you, just because, essentially this is money the United States owes itself, but this is really historically massive deficit. And usually without getting without getting too heavily into economics and not meaning to scare anybody either, but usually the deficit, if the growth of the deficit can meet the growth of the economy, there's really not that much to be concerned about. You're still accruing debt, but you can keep up with it. In this case, debt is exceeding economic growth. So I think that's something to keep your eye on. It isn't something necessarily to be afraid of. And um, so that's something to just keep in mind. Um, and that Saturn Venus conjunction will tend to it's a nice combination because Saturn kind of tempts down Venus's excesses to a certain extent. And it also rules Jupiter. So Venus rules the sign in which Jupiter is placed, which is Taurus. So that should calm Jupiter down in terms of excess spending. But it's still kind of a difficult placement. So this will cause a little bit of pessimism. The other thing we want to look at in terms of this chart right now is Jupiter's in the first house. That's the ruler of the 11th house. So there is this belief in sustainable gain, but there is a lot of debt because Jupiter rules the 8th house and Saturn and Venus are in the 10th house in this chart. So that's actually good for work, but it can mean some um, reductions in employers or some tightening of the economy over the next month or so. And this will probably continue through April, I would say April, May. And just because of the Saturn Rahu conjunction we have coming up here. And it'll be slow growth, basically. But I think there are other reasons to be optimistic, mainly in the second half of the year. So, don't um, don't be discouraged if things seem to be moving a little bit too slowly right now. Um, the other thing is uh, Venus, this forms a kind of a Raj Yoga in the chart because you have the Lord of the ninth and the 10th house in conjunction with the first Lord. So that does create good opportunities, especially for financial growth. Mars is still difficultly placed, so relationship life will be difficult for a lot of people over the next, I would say, over the next 6 months, more or less. Excuse me. Okay, so um, getting back to this point. So, relationship life is going to be a little bit challenging for people, especially over the next 6 months or so. And also, I would in general not recommend real estate investments until June. Now, again, there will be a slight window, a small window between roughly, um, I would say, 3 weeks from now until around February, I'm sorry, until around March that if you get a good deal on real estate, you may be able to do that. But I think it's generally safer to wait until June or July just because of Mars's placement in the chart. So even though Mars won't be afflicted after it enters Gemini, it is kind of a position which is can make one prone to deceit or dishonesty uh, in in the dealings of others. So so you have to be really careful about that particular combination. And this will happen. Let me see. Are they going to make it? Let me just. Yeah. So yeah. So Mars will be around. So around the third week in Mars, Mars will be in the third week in January. Excuse me. Mars will be in Gemini, and Mercury will still be in Sagittarius, and um, Mars and Mercury will be under the influence of Mars for about the next month and a half or so. So it really isn't a clear time to purchase real estate. If you get an exceptionally good deal, that's fine. But just beware that you won't get the full truth about the property you're considering. And if you have people check it over and look for hidden loopholes in the agreement, then you can be safe. But in general, I would recommend waiting until June or July. Um, the other thing is, now again, this depends on your individual chart. Some charts are, not all charts are the same, but just in general, not really a good time for purchasing real estate because Mars and Mercury are the two primary real estate planets. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this chart in terms of um, foreign affairs. There's a lot of panic around the world, especially among our friends. That could be connected with fears about the economy, fears about a new administration, and also fears that this administration will disrupt the world order. And that's a legitimate fear. I think that's actually, I don't think it's the intent to destroy anything, really. It's just to change things. And, um, but that does, I'm just trying to think of a good way to put it without sounding um, too conspiratorial. Uh, Basically, uh, the systems that have been set up over the past 50 or so years have been designed, and especially over the past 30 or so years, have been designed to um, things in a certain direction. Okay. Um, but current administrations, and we're seeing this not only in the United States, but also in Germany, England, Ireland, even Korea, um, is even Korea, Australia, Canada, places like that. And even in terms of what's happening in Palestine and Israel, our efforts to try to switch direction. So you have essentially opposing forces at work right now. That may be the simplest, most non-controversial way to say it. And some of these forces have done some good. Uh, some of the changes have produced some good. Some have produced some bad things. So we're seeing increasing um, monopolization of industries and economic growth around a few individuals and a few companies. Not in everything, obviously, but but that's what's happening. That tends to take away. So while that's not inherently bad, it is a bit dangerous or detrimental to self-determination or um, deciding what's best for you in individually. So there's always some kind of a trade-off if you have this increasingly um, homogenous society. Um, so I so I'm a big internationalist, but I think I may have said this on this broadcast before. I'm a big internationalist. I, I love different nations. I love different cultures. But in order to have an international communication, you need different nations. You can't you can't do that without different nations. And in order to have optimization of trade, you have to have some competition. Okay. So I think that that's sort of like uh, what we're seeing right now. A lot of countries have grown uncomfortable with the way things have been redistributed. A lot of countries have taken on huge amounts of debt, both due to COVID and due to changes in ecological policy and also energy policy, and also because of wars. And so a lot of these things, we're going to be dealing with the backlash from these things over the next few years. Um, and I think it's fascinating, especially if you pay attention to places like England. You're seeing like a really spurt in growth. And even in Germany, you're seeing a spurt in growth in France and to a lesser extent, Canada. You're seeing a growth in what I would call um, nationalistic parties. So essentially, these are parties or these are forms of government that put the interests of their nations first as opposed to the globe. So I'm not coming out in favor or against that particular strategy, but um, and I want to see everyone do well internationally. Uh, at the same time, I can understand why people are getting a little bit um, dismayed at carrying additional burdens they didn't have to carry for years and years and years. So and as I've said many times, the United States is doing comparably better than these other countries are. Um, Sweden, Norway, even places like the Netherlands have uh, taken some major financial hits for a variety of reasons. And so you have this essentially like reactions like what happened in Argentina. Uh, so so these aren't necessarily things to be feared, they're things to be learned from. And there are also things, so inevitably there are changes in position. I've lived long enough to know that if you think something's going to go along one path inexorably for a long period of time, you're going to be disappointed. Okay. There will always be some kickback or some opposition. And that's felt quite strongly in the Mars Saturn um, aspect in the Mars Venus aspect in this chart. And also you'll see it in the Mars Mercury aspect when that comes. So Mars will tend to be pretty much Mars and Saturn and the nodes will tend to be the dominant planets in this chart over the next 6 months. So those are all difficult planets. So I'm not saying everybody is going to suffer. That's not the idea. But there'll be changes, there'll be shifts. There'll probably be more, not fewer isolated incidents of violence. I hope I'm wrong about that, by the way. But this is where a lot of terrorism comes from. It's Mars in Cancer is an emotional response. So it can cause injury. It's not a real positive planetary placement. Um, and so just keep your eyes and ears open. Uh, don't panic. That's the most important thing because we have this Rahu Moon conjunction. And just take it as it comes. Adjust lifestyles to accommodate, so if the kids want something, tell them, well, maybe next week we can do it, or maybe next month, as opposed to just caving in and doing it right away. This is the Makar Sankranthi chart. Um, this is also one thing I want to mention, and that was I I do plan to do one broadcast on the P. Diddy trial. I was planning to do that this week, and it just escaped my attention. But that's actually kind of interesting because um, that seems to involve a lot of people, and it reaches into a lot of stars and a lot of celebrities and all this other stuff. So that's the Rahu in Pisces. Um, and it'll also involve some religious figures, some spiritual figures, some leaders. So, but let's look at the Makar Sankranti chart, and I'll explain that next week, probably. Let's look at the Makar Sankranti chart. And so we have Venus and Saturn in the first house. I took this for Delhi, India, or New Delhi, India. It was kind of an arbitrary place to take it. I get virtually the same chart if I do 9:03 a.m. in the United States, but I just chose India for this one. And we have Rahu in the second house, so there'll be this year should be, I would say, a lot of focus on education, a lot of focus on reconsidering economic policies. Rahu's in the second house, so there'll be more focus on financial security, more focus on financial stability. Um, the Saturn-Venus conjunction in the first house for me kind of signals an economic downturn. This may be due to debt because the 12th house lord is in the first house, and you'll see a lot of governments trying to overspend again because Sun's in the 12th house in order to shore themselves out. That'll meet with some opposition though because of the Moon Mars conjunction. It doesn't mean necessarily that markets will tank. It doesn't mean the economy will necessarily tank, but it will probably slow down a bit because of this Venus-Saturn conjunction. Jupiter's in the fourth house. That does mean domestic life will be a little bit threatened. Um, and there'll be more focus on education, both nationally and internationally. Um, Jupiter and also on financial security. So that Saturn Venus conjunction tends to make it a little bit tough for societies to maintain financial stability. You'll see a lot of governments, and you're all already seeing it right now. There was a woman who was forced to resign from the Labour government in England because of I can't remember the woman's name right now, but because of alleged incompetence in her work, and also there was a series of misrepresentations about her background. So those are the kinds of things you can expect to see, I think, universally across the world. This isn't going to be just happening in England. This will happen in the United States. It will happen in China. There were several Chinese leaders I was reading about that were just essentially stripped, kicked out of the party over the past few months. And I just learned about this the other day. So there, so the top leadership is not going away. They're not going out, but certain subordinate members of the party are being essentially systematically pruned out. And I think those are the kinds of things. So we don't often hear about those things in news coverage in the United States, not because anybody's trying to hide it, but because it's not really particularly relevant to us as Americans, as people in the United States. But it's important in terms of China because essentially I think these officials were accused of corruption, and so that's part of the ongoing blend uh, that we're going to see. We're going to see more leaders lose positions because sun's in the 12th house. In South Korea, there's fear that they may be close to civil war, uh, just because the current president tried to declare martial law. That failed, and and there's a lot of protest. And as a matter of fact, last week, excuse me, I looked at the geographical lines, and there seems to be problems in Japan or near Korea, if I recall it correctly. And this must be what's represented here. We'll look at the lines this week too. Mercury's in the 11th house. This should be a relatively good year for things like cryptocurrency, um, just because it'll have more of an established credibility. Um, Mars is, I still wouldn't trust it. I'll be honest with you, at least for the first 6 months of the year, just because of that Mars Mercury uh, involvement. After July, you can make educated um, investments, but I would say it's a high risk market between now and then. Um, and let's see now. And just in general, Jupiter more focused on educational institutions. There will be some clamping down on educational institutions that's already being threatened. Some possible clamping down on freedom of speech. Interestingly enough, there have been some, so in the interest of fairness, there have been some efforts to try to suppress free speech coming now from the right, based around the protests against Israel and other areas, and and so we're seeing some of this some anti-Islamic language coming out of the right. Uh, so I'm not a fan of that any more than I am a fan of the left trying to shut down different aspects of speech. So this will be a juggling act over the next few months. And no matter which side you find yourself aligned with, this will be a problematic area because, at least in my humble opinion, freedom of speech is really, really important in a society like ours. If that goes, that's really sort of like the beginning of the end of a democratic structure. So again, like I said, this is not without precedent. It's happened. Geez, I can think as far back as the 1960s where um, certain civil rights protests, certain back into the 50s. Let's be honest, going back to the 50s. Um, there's always been this undercurrent in American society about suppressing what you don't want to hear. So you can think back to the McCarthy years. You can think back to the suppression of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement in the 1960s. You can think about the treatment of the Reagan presidency by the Nixon and Reagan presidency by the press. You can think of the um, reporting on the Clinton administration and the efforts to remove Bill Clinton from office. You can think about the Bush administration and um, the arrests that took place of American citizens. And so we don't want to go back to any of those particular situations. Okay. And this continues up through the Obama administration. There were a lot of, uh, there was lack of news coverage on some of the things that Obama had taken part in. There was incredibly negative press coverage on Trump, and there was also suppression of data during the Biden administration. So you don't want to see, you want to see essentially the ability of people to gather and agree and disagree and share opinions back and forth. So I think that this is something I'll be keeping a continuous look at over the next few years because it's important. But that Venus, Saturn in the first house, uh, Mercury heading over to Gemini, I'm sorry, Mars heading over to Gemini, and Mars aspecting Mercury over the next couple of months. It'll be kind of interesting to see how shifts in opinion. And nobody's immune from this. It doesn't matter if you're um, right wing or left wing. There's always been a desire to suppress opinions you don't agree with. That's sort of built into, I don't want to say it's built into, I think it's built into human nature, if I'm honest. All right. So that's something that we have to be really, really concerned about because to it's tough to hear dissenting speech. It just is. All right. So if you think you're coming up with a brilliant idea or you think your position is totally justified, if somebody disagrees with you, that hurts. That interferes with your mission, right? So but it's important because we need those other voices. We need those people saying, yeah, but have you thought about this? It's not really a matter of who's right or who's wrong. The free flow of information is what keeps organisms alive. You know, you can block out poisons once you figure out they're poisons. But you can't protect yourself from something you don't know is happening. Okay. So that's just my pocket philosophy for the week. Um, so over here, so let's go over here to the next week and we'll look at Aries first. Aries, I'm a little bit longer on than I want to be at this particular point, but hope you'll be forgiving of me. Aries has Jupiter in the second house. So again, there's this big, especially in home life, connected with home life, there's a lot of pressure to spend on this sign. And I would also say there's a lot of over optimism with this particular sign. K2's in the sixth house, some potential for diseases or illnesses. Sun is in the ninth house. That's actually good for increasing control and good luck for children, and also fulfilling desires or ambitions. Saturn and Venus in the 11th house, slow but steady gain in wealth. But again, you're going to have to watch spending. And that shows up through Moon and Rahu in the 12th house. So you have to watch out for people either overspending or lying about spending for this particular sign. But so this would be from April 15th through May 15th. For Taurus, Taurus has Jupiter in the first house. That's not a bad placement. Jupiter rules the eighth house, so it can give some gains through investments. It rules the 11th house, but again, you have to be careful about the investments you make. You have to be very careful that the government doesn't interfere with the investments, or that you're going to have superiors interfering with your actions or working behind the scenes. And family members can also be a little bit sneaky, a little bit tricky with this combination. Mars is in the third house, so there's strong ambition for the sign, especially for the relationship partners. But the the ambition will be emotional. That's really the best way I can say it. K2's in the fifth house, not bad for financial growth, but also children will be a little bit unruly or a little bit disappointing. Um, Saturn, Sun, and Mercury are in the eighth house, so some interference from bosses or family members. Saturn and Venus are in the 10th house, good for career growth through hard work. Moon and Rahu are in the 11th house, so transitory gain, some financial gain is expected. Um, Gemini, this is June 15th to July 15th. Uh, Mars is in the second house. It's surrounded by Jupiter and Mars. So if I use the Gemini Argala combination, Jupiter overrides Mars. So essentially, uh, this cancels out the negative economic growth for this particular sign, but there is still some worry about family matters, and especially with K2 in the fourth house, family matters will seem a little bit difficult to deal with. There'll be a feeling of hopelessness in terms of family matters. Financial growth is expected through hard work. Relationship life will become a center point. So working with people in either business partnerships or romantic relationships is possible. Um, but again, romantic relationships are also in jeopardy because Jupiter's in the 12th house, and that does tend to give disinterest on the part of relationship partners, unfortunately. Venus and Saturn are in the ninth house. This isn't a bad placement. It's really good for this particular rising sign. Uh, and there will be some short-term fame or recognition for the sign over the next week. For Cancer, Cancer has, this is July 15th to August 15th, has Mars in the first house. As I've said so many times before, this is actually not a bad placement for Mars, even though Mars is debilitated. But relations with siblings will be strained, relationships with friends will be a bit strained, and the sign will feel a little bit less, more aggravated and angry than normal. But not bad for career growth. The fifth house lord is um, is well placed in this sign, and so is the 10th house lord. So career growth should be expected. K2 is in the third house, a lot of ambition, a lot of fearlessness. Sun is the second house ruler, which is connected with money, in the sixth house, so there can be some struggles connected with money. Saturn and Venus are in the eighth house, and again, as I said before, this sign is kind of reconfiguring how it thinks about relationship life and also about financial progress, and also about um, how it wants to live its life. The moon is in the ninth house along with Rahu. That presents a kind of a Raj yoga for Rahu and Moon, although Moon is uncomfortable. It feels a little bit uneasy taking chances with that combination, but it is a good week to take chances. And Jupiter's in the 11th house, giving some financial gain from past events. For Leo, Leo is the Lord of Leo is placed in the fifth house along with Mercury, so that should give some financial gain for this sign. Mars is in the 12th house, so there will be some problems with both status and with luck. Okay, so that's sort of a problem for this particular sign. Um, and also with fulfilling ambitions or goals, to be honest. Eventually this sign will get what it wants, but it'll come uh, a bit later on, like around June or so. Let's see now. Venus and Saturn are in the seventh house, can give some problems with a relationship partner or some unhappiness with a relationship partner. Moon and Rahu are in conjunction in the eighth house. So again, this is, when I say conspiracy theories, this is a conscious attempt to um, defame or minimize um, a person's status. So Leos will have that kind of a problem over the next uh, 6 months or so. But this is particularly strong right now. Um, Jupiter's in the 10th house. That's a good placement. It will increase financial success, and also it will um, tend to take away some barriers this sign has been uh, meeting and realizing its goals. So eventually it will get what it wants, but again, it'll be a bit of a struggle. For Virgo, K2's in the first house, 6 degrees, 13 minutes. Rahu's in the seventh house, along with the moon. So this indicates difficult relationship life or some anxiety in relationship life. Saturn and Venus are in the sixth house, give some difficulty in achieving goals immediately, although Saturn in the sixth is really determined. It really works hard. Venus doesn't like being in the sixth house, so um, Sun is in the fourth house along with Mercury, so this can give some financial problems, especially connected with property and career. And let's see now. Jupiter's in the ninth house. That's actually a lucky placement. Jupiter going into this particular sign does give this sign some more financial luck. Mars in the 11th house, financial gains, but not without some arguments or difficulties with friends. For Libra, Libra has a relatively interesting week. Um, the Lord of the second house is Mars, is debilitated in the 10th house, so that there's not much financial progress, especially connected um, with um, with career life. So career will be a little bit slowed over the next 6 months. Um, Sun and Mercury, though, are in the third house, gives the sign a lot more ambition, a lot more growth. Venus and Saturn are in the fifth house, which is a good combination. It's a Raj Yoga for this chart. So past efforts, especially efforts to learn or to communicate, will bear fruit this month. Um, and again, this sign will be extraordinarily disciplined this month. Um, Moon is in the sixth house with Rahu, so there is some anxiety about goals being met or overcoming enemies. That'll pass within a few days, within a couple of days. Jupiter's in the eighth house. A lot of learning about hidden or unseen matters, and a lot of hidden debts coming up. Let's see now. Ninth house, Lord is Mercury. The Lord of the ninth house is in the third house, so it should give some good financial luck. Mars in the 10th house, a lot of effort at work life, but again, like I said, not as many rewards as we would hope. And K2 in the 12th gives more spiritual growth or more spiritual advancement. For Scorpio, Scorpio has Mars in the ninth house. Typically not a good placement because this is what's called a Bhatika sign or a Bhatika placement for fixed signs, but again, it's still the first lord in the ninth house, so you should see some progress for this sign this month. Sun and Mercury should give some career gains and some career um, attainments and also some financial gains. But again, K2 in the 11th house, not good for trusting friends. Friends are not your uh, friends are not friends with this combination. Saturn and Venus are in the fourth house. Saturn's aspecting the first house. This is Joe Biden's rising sign, just for your information. I've said this several times. So this will give some problems with family, but at least there'll be an ability to um, influence events with this combination. Moon is in the fifth house, along with Rahu, some scandal connected with children or with luck or investments. Jupiter's in the seventh house, so you should be careful of it to avoid uh, the appearance of misconduct. Jupiter's in the seventh house, it kind of protects the first house in this chart, so that's actually good. And Mars is in the ninth house. We've already discussed this as well. This gives some financial growth, but again, very limited, and some luck with law, but again, very limited. K2 in the 11th, we've already discussed. For Sagittarius, we have Sun and Mercury in the first house. Sun's the lord of the ninth house of luck, so this gives good financial luck, good career luck, good relationship luck for the sign. Saturn and Venus are in the third house, good ability to realize dreams or ambitions. Moon and Rahu are in the fourth house. That's a good combinational role for financial growth, uh, but also some worry or some anxiety on the home front. This is the United States' rising sign, by the way. Jupiter's in the sixth house. This is, again, his mistrust of teachers, people who give guidance, people who give advice, uh, and they may even be actively fighting you. Mars is in the eighth house. It's the Lord of the 12th house and the fifth, so luck will seem to be a little bit betrayed um, during this particular period. K2's in the 10th. There's a lack of understanding about which direction this particular sign is headed in, especially work-wise. And Capricorn. Capricorn, we have Saturn and Venus in the second house, should give good financial growth to the sign. Moon and Rahu are in the third house, some anxiety about whether or not the sign can realize its ambitions or goals. Jupiter's in the fifth house, good for financial growth, good for investments. Mars is in the seventh house. There'll be opposition from business partners or fights with business partners over the next week. K2's in the ninth. It will give sporadic luck. It won't give consistent luck, but it will give sporadic luck. K2 does lead into the first house. So I think overall this sign will be more lucky than not lucky, but it'll be very busy. K2 in this particular sign makes Sagittarius extremely busy. And also makes Capricorn very busy as well. Okay, so I think one of the things you'll have to do, especially since we're talking about Capricorn and Sagittarius, my apologies, is you'll have to look at ways to ensure your luck is actually met. The Sun and Mercury in the 12th house means dealing with foreign agents or people outside your circle of comfort. So that's actually not bad if you're involved in anything that has to do with um, people involved with other governments or other countries or even people in different uh, parts of your own country. For Aquarius, Aquarius has Saturn and Venus in the first house. This is another Raj Yoga for Aquarius. Aquarius has had this kind of unique year because it's had Saturn in its first house, which is considered good. Saturn's in what's called its second best sign in Aquarius. But it's been hurt because Rahu's in the second house. There's never a feeling that you're getting enough in or enough financial growth in or financial progress in. And Jupiter is in the fourth house. That's not bad. So home life is relatively pleasant despite some bumpiness. Mars is in the sixth house. Mars is in the sun connected with Rahu, with Moon and Rahu, so that gives some fear of enemies or some problems with people who who are who oppose you. Ketu's in the eighth house. This isn't a bad combination. Gives interest in metaphysics and spiritual matters. Sun and Mercury are in the 11th house, good for financial gains for Aquarius. For Pisces, we have the Moon Rahu combination in the first house. And this combination is actually, like I said, it's one of those things, it's a kind of a Raj Yoga. Uh, so the nodes get involved in these Raj Yogas or lucky positions. Or Raj Yoga is a lucky position. It gives luck in action. So you have the Lord of the fifth house in conjunction with the node in the first house, which is an angle. So it's a trine and an angle together in the first house. And so that will give good relationships with the public, uh, good mass appeal, um, opportunity for growth. Jupiter's in the third house, but there'll be a lot of temptation to spend. Mars is in the fifth house, some difficulty or arguments with children. Ketu's in the seventh house, relationship partners will seem to be difficult to please or make happy. Sun and Mercury are in the 10th house. Not a bad placement. Um, as a matter of fact, quite good. So you'll see both the ninth lord, the eighth lord and the ninth lord in conjunction, and that will give unexpected gains and financial progress. But again, this is tendency to overspend for most of the signs that still afflicts Pisces this week. So again, if you can deal with people from other countries or other cultures, that's great. If you can deal with things that are connected with the rest or recovery, that's great. But again, there's this tendency to overspend that's afflicting a lot of signs this month. As a matter of fact, it's a general problem in terms of the chart because when Rahu moves through Pisces, there's this general concern that nobody's telling you the truth, number one, and number two, that you can essentially bar your way to um, success, and neither of which is true. So again, it's just be cautious. You don't have to cut back on everything, but just be a little bit cautious in terms of expenditures because a lot of that stuff will come due in June or July. All right, so let's go over to the world map. See if I can increase it, cut it down, and try and see where things are happening. Okay, that's what I want to see. So we still have some properties with land and with storms near Hawaii and near the west coast of Canada, and some government scandals in Canada and also in Alaska. It looks like we have a Venus line um, running down Western Canada. So maybe some problems with resources or some flooding in Western Canada. And let's see now. And this is a Jupiter line. Yeah, so that'll bring a lot of rainfall. There's a Saturn line running right up through California and through Nevada and all the way up through Oregon and into Utah and into Canada, Western Canada. So the Saturn line tends to indicate some financial difficulties. The Mercury line, we'll hear about them pretty strongly, and they'll also affect, to a lesser extent, they'll cause some anxiety in Arizona and New Mexico all the way up through Montana. Okay, so all these states like Utah, uh, Colorado, all the way up here. This entire line looks like it's going to be kind of scandal ridden all the way down to Mexico. Sun passes through the central United States. The sun is in Sagittarius. or this is roughly east central United States and down through Mexico. So there can be oppressive government control in this part of the country, and also in Canada, from Midwestern Canada all the way down through Minnesota, um, Iowa, down near Louisiana, and Texas and Oklahoma. So excessive government control or excessive government overreach, I would call it, um, in this part of the world. And let's see now. And we have a Mars line running through close to Ottawa and down through Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and the Virgin Islands and Cuba, and even to Panama, and all the way down into Ecuador, Peru, and maybe influencing Chile, excuse me. So again, this Mars line does indicate the potential for natural disasters, the potential for gun violence, the potential for police overactivity, um, and that's awfully close to Washington, D.C. So that makes me a little bit concerned over the next 3 weeks or so. We have Jupiter passing close to New England and going through Nova Scotia and hitting down through Brazil. And that'll give overconfidence to Brazil. You have to get this little guy out of the way. And there's a Venus line going through. Yeah, so Brazil's economy is probably going to be a little bit overly expansive or overly um, developed over the next few weeks. We have a Moon Rahu line passing right through Iceland. So again, some government scandals close to Azores. And also the Mercury line is not really interacting that much with anything, although it is joining with the Moon Rahu Sun line, over here. Too much government control in West Africa. And there's a Mars line running through Portugal, Spain, and into Northern Africa, in through Libya. I'm sorry, in through Algeria. It's in through Libya. I'm trying to remember now, and all the way down into South Africa, cutting all the way down. So again, some strong potential for gun violence. This is the part of the world, again, we don't see a lot of coverage on because they're essentially old French colonies, but there has been a lot of violence in that part of the world over the past few months, over the past year or so. There's a Venus line and there's a Mars and Venus line, which are encompassing Europe. So that does indicate to me some economic contraction in Europe, all the way to Turkey and to Poland. And we have a Saturn line close to Ukraine and close to Moscow, and a Jupiter line. So maybe, and these are also intersecting in Iran and also into Saudi Arabia. So all those countries will be shifting governments or shifting political affiliations. Maybe we'll hit a negotiation point in Ukraine. I hope so, pretty soon. And Iran looks really confused over what it wants to do versus what it feels is constrained from doing. The other thing I wanted to mention was the Venus line is going through Israel and Saudi Arabia. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Saudi Arabia will be involved in the conflict, but it looks like, reputation-wise, Israel will suffer over the next month or so. And that's mainly because Venus is conjunct Saturn. So that's something they should watch out for. And Saturn and this entire area is between Venus and Saturn and Jupiter. So there'll be um, some suffering in both countries, but more in Iran than in Israel and Palestine. Let's see now. There's a Mercury line running through Pakistan, Afghanistan. This part of the world, I was reading recently, this part of the world is really ripe for a lot of violent activity. So I would watch this part of the world really carefully, all the way close to India. And so these are extremely unstable lines. Moon Rahu conjunctions are extremely unstable. So I'd encourage you to watch Afghanistan and Pakistan in particular, um, especially the possibility of war or violent activity and some suffering in those two countries and also in Iran. We have a sun line running through Tibet and through India, so that indicates more governmental control. There are Mars lines running through China, Thailand, close to Cambodia and Vietnam, and also Indonesia and Malaysia. And I think this part of the world, and interestingly enough, Vietnam has been pushing back against China over the past few months. So this area, and I said this many months ago, and you may remember this. This part, the second eclipse in October, which I thought was the worst eclipse, hit this part of the world more strongly than this part of the world. So this is what I would look at as the tinderbox area of the world. If I were to see war break out, I would expect it more to happen here or here or even here than I would even over here. Um, it's so essentially, but let's hope they can resolve their differences. There's a lot more area to cover here. Uh, Venus is running through Japan. It's close to Korea, so Korea may be able to um, overcome its problems as a Jupiter line that may give the ability to do invasions. Guinea has a Jupiter line going through it. Australia has um, Jupiter, Mercury, and what's this last line? God, some of these are tough. That's not a Jupiter line. Hold on a second. That's Some of these are tough to read. Hold on. It's like a Mercury line running through it. I think overall we'll be hearing a lot more about Australia over the next few months. And New Zealand has, uh, and again, some political um, turmoil in New Zealand, although it'll calm down a little bit this month. All right, so that's it for me for this week. I hope you all had a great new year. I wish you the best in the coming months, although the next 6 months look a little bit problematic, if I'm entirely honest, but they're not really horrible. Um, yeah, as I said, um, we can expect, I would say, domestic violence over here, uh, but again, more conflicts over territory and land in this part of the world and in this part of the world. Okay, my friends. All right, so I love you all. Take care of yourselves. Don't worry, we'll get through this. And this is uh, not necessarily, this is an ending to one cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. So um, just be aware that when things end and when things begin, there's always a little bit of disruption, but it never lasts forever. Okay? All right, I love you all. Take care of yourselves and be healthy, be happy, and be nice to each other. Okay? Bye, everyone. See you next week. Sorry I darkened it a little bit there.